Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series of Spotlight, we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And to help us celebrate is Lou Jacquet. Welcome to Spotlight.
Thank you, Father.
Lou, you are the former editor of the Catholic Exponent, a paper near and dear to the hearts of many in our diocese. Before we talk about the Exponent, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, and how you found yourself here in the Diocese of Youngstown.
Wow, that could take several hours, but basically the story was I grew up in Cleveland. I was born in Bedford, Ohio, and grew up in Cleveland. And when I was a former high school teacher, taught at Lumen Cordium in Bedford, Ohio, and I decided I'd always wanted to be a journalist, so I went back to graduate school. And when I came out, I had it all set to be, I wanted to follow my dad. He was an associate editor for Standard Oil magazine, so Ohio magazine. And when I got out, no jobs. So I ended up, my dad found me a job in the Catholic Universe Bulletin. It said, in Cleveland, it said Youngstown, Ohio was looking for a reporter at that time. And so I drove down, and Denny Finneran, the editor, hired me on the spot, which was a big shock to me, because I came down to thinking I would just be interviewed, and I came home with a job when I was 27, and it started 35 years of Catholic press work, so it's wonderful. Been a real blessing, yeah.
That's good. Well, we know that the Catholic Exponent has been around since the founding of our diocese. Tell us what you remember about the early days of the Exponent. What was it like? Who was in charge, and how did it operate?
Well, the Exponent, of course, was formed at the time of the diocese 7 years before I was born, so I don't have too many memories of the beginning of it. But the early years of the Exponent, we were all part, from 1943 to 1989, part of the Catholic Press Union, which was 3 papers, Cleveland, Toledo, and Youngstown. And Cleveland was always in charge of everything except everything local here was sent to Cleveland to be put together. And so the first editor was Otto Bordenkircher, and there might have been 1 or 2 others in the middle that were there for a short time. But then in 1962, Ed Barman became the editor. He came from Columbus, and he brought with him Denny Finneran, who was the associate editor for 10 years. And then Denny became sort of a local legend here. He was here from as editor from 72 to 96, when I became editor. So there was that long history of really continuity going way back. The paper, the old days, things were so different than they are now with the technology. We actually, the layouts were done here. This is well before I ever got here. They were put together and sent up on the Greyhound every night to Cleveland, where they were laid out and put together. And can you imagine that, the Greyhound? I mean, that's how different the world was.
Well, you know, it's hard to believe that we did things like that back then. But technology and the way we do things changes so rapidly, and things could be done in the blink of an eye. People can be in another part of the world in a matter of hours if they needed to be. You know, so that's how the news is, though, isn't it? You know, the news is just so much for just the moment. And why is it important for us as people of faith to be part of all that, to be part of telling the news?
Well, I think the thing is, you know, if you look back to when I began, I was in graduate school at Ohio University in 1976, and we were still using Selectric 3 typewriters, and we were, the last week of graduate school, one of the professors said, "There's something new coming along now, there's computers, but don't worry about it," because we had never used it. That's the arc of the career that I have had in the Catholic press. Everything is lightning speed now. And it's so important for people to be able to know how to hear the news. You know, that's the importance of the Catholic press. Anybody can pick up Time. Well, they can't pick up Newsweek anymore. It doesn't exist. But Time, they can go to all the 24-hour channels and so forth. But they don't have the faith perspective, and that's what the Catholic press does. There's still about, I believe, 175, 150 Catholic newspapers across the United States covering their local area and really helping people to get the sense of what's the news of the day and how to look at it from the Catholic perspective.
And even though the news changes, why is it important for us to still convey the news as a newspaper? You know, sometimes we hear things and it's already old, but why is it still important for us to be part of that dynamic?
Well, I think a lot of it is that people have short attention spans. And television has so many gifts, but one of the gifts it doesn't have is many times on the interviews being done on national television, they'll give somebody 30 seconds a minute to convey some concept. With the Catholic press, one of the great benefits we had is that you're giving people something to hold, or you're giving them, at least online, something where they can look at it, they can bring it back up, they can really study it, and they can go in to parish discussions or whatever pretty well informed. You know, and that's so critical. One of the great problems we've had in the Catholic Church for so many years, everywhere, is that not enough people know enough about their faith. That's a struggle. And that's something that all the Catholic press editors that I ever knew, you know, from day one, that was something that they really tried to do, was take the faith, take the news of the day, and hit the people in the pews with it. You know, help them to understand what's really going on.
You know, in our last 2 minutes of our first segment, the word that comes to mind, obviously, is evangelization. Anything we do, especially with the media, has to be about sharing the good news. And obviously, the Catholic print is one of those fundamental ways that we can do that. And I've often thought that when we do share the faith, we've got to be transparent, we've got to be truthful, we've got to be honest. And how important is that when we talk about the news nowadays, to be honest?
Oh, it's paramount. It's absolutely paramount. I've always felt, in the Catholic press in particular, if you have bad news in a diocese, and it's sad when you do, but get it out there. Bishop Malone was excellent about that. You know, if you have something, put it out, let people know about the truth, and move on. That was a key thing. And I think the dioceses that have had most trouble in this country are those that they don't really, they're afraid. And that's a sad thing. There's no need to be afraid.
Sure. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but before we do, we're going to take a quick break. So please stay with us. We'll be right back. Miles from the first Catholic parish in all of Ohio, in a place called Canton, Catholics gathered in 1817 to celebrate Mass with Father Fenwick. Because of limited building space, the Mass was held outdoors under a huge oak tree. The spot, near the present Church of St. John the Baptist, which was established in 1823 as the second oldest parish in the Diocese of Youngstown. The oak tree grew there until 1906, when it was struck by lightning. To preserve it, the parishioners took the wood and carved a chair out of it, which remains in the church today. In 2012, St. John the Baptist was elevated to a basilica. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. The first Catholic parish, established in Portage County in 1831 near Randolph-Suffield, was St. Joseph Church. Years later, John Newman, who would become the first American male to be canonized, was sent there to give a mission to help heal the divisions that occurred between the German Catholics who had settled there. Perhaps that is what made him a saint. The parish is also noted for its school, which dates back to 1832, being the oldest English-speaking school west of the Alleghenies. The church is also famous for its Lourdes Shrine, which has welcomed pilgrims since 1927 and is the only exact replica of the world-famous grotto at Lourdes in France. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm talking with Lou Jacquet, and we're celebrating the 75th anniversary year of the Diocese of Youngstown. Lou, before when we took a break, we were talking about some things, and you had mentioned about Bishop Malone. Bishop Malone has been very near and dear to many of our hearts. He was here in our diocese for a number of years. His influence was extremely significant. But you have some information in your recollections of him after he retired as a bishop. Would you like to share some of those with us?
I would. Before I would get to that, I would just say that I have a special fondness for Bishop Malone because when I first worked here in 1977 with the Exponent for 10 months, I was a young reporter right out of school. And when I wasn't making enough money, and I got a job offer in Chicago for $7,000 more. And the last day, I'd already signed and everything. The last day before I left, Bishop Malone called me in, and he said, I want to match that. I want you to stay. It's important to have somebody young who cares about the church here. Well, I couldn't. I'd already gone and everything. But I never forgot that kindness that he, and ended up, in 1991, I ended up back in the Diocese of Youngstown for the rest of my career in journalism, so I really owe that to Bishop Malone.
Sure, and it's those things that we do remember, those really acts of kindnesses that not many people know about, that we really celebrate.
Bishop Malone fascinated me because I knew him when I was 27, and then I knew him until the day he died. And in between, he had the reputation of a man, no nonsense in some ways, very firm on his decisions and so forth. Local boy makes good, all that sort of thing. But the thing I found fascinating about him was after he had stepped aside, waiting for the new bishop to be named, he agreed to do an interview with me that we printed in the Exponent at the time. And it was really powerful to see. He was very emotional about his legacy in this diocese in this particular way. He said that he loved being the bishop. He loved the good things and the difficult things. But the thing that hurt him personally was that Bishop Walsh had been the builder. He had been here during that time of incredible expansion in the schools, bricks and mortar, all these wonderful things, the programs being started, carrying on from Bishop McFadden and so forth. And yet, Bishop Malone said the thing that hurt him or he struggled with, and he was very emotional about it as he talked about it, was he had to be the man to begin to bring the diocese down to size, to begin to close things, to begin to make the tough decisions. And at that point, he actually had tears welling up in his eyes, which just amazed me that he would be that open with me. And I never forgot that. Fascinating man in that way.
Sure. But as you reflect on that, as I was thinking about that when you were sharing that experience, that's the hallmark, I think, of a good and generous administrator, to understand the need when to bring things in and when to let things grow. Or, it's part of who we are as a church even. Let's face it, many things over the years in the life of the church have changed. Many of our churches and parishes that we used to have around are no longer with us. And the same with the lives of people. And so I think, understanding that as things change, that's really the only constant, is a change is always occurring, it's always happening. And we have our particular mark on that. So I give him credit for saying that, but also for being a good administrator, because I think that's what we needed at that time.
And he said very openly, he said, a bishop is here for a certain amount of time, as are the leaders that he chooses for different positions. And then he said, you get off stage. The next generation comes on, and they have new decisions and new challenges. And he said you have to put aside your ego about it.
Sure.
Interesting to hear that.
Yeah. Well, it's true, I think, for pastors. When a new pastor is assigned, a good pastor who is retired from the place or who has taken on another assignment does not always go back to that old parish parish where he was before, because it's not always in the best interest of the present pastor. So you do that with a little mindfulness and thoughtfulness and kindness too. Let's talk also about some of those other people that you've had the opportunity and the pleasure to interview. Anyone else that kind of stands out, or any particular issue that you focused on or talked about over your many years as the editor?
Well, I think over the course of my career, interviewed probably about 750, 800 people in 5 different dioceses. So, including people like Ray Rep, a very fascinating guy, came up with that music right out of Vatican II. And people play Here We Are All Together and that sort of thing in that whole era. And Ray Rep would say something like, I wrote those for 5 seminarians. I never expected them to get out and be seen anywhere else. So people like Ray Rep was interesting. I interviewed Mother Teresa in another diocese when I worked there. Fascinating person, small, but commanded the room, completely commanded the room, and humble as could be. I'm trying to think of some of the other people. I interviewed Bishop Worrell. I interviewed cardinals a couple of times, the apostolic delegate, things like that. But in the diocese, I had a particular focus as editor, and that was to bring the different parts of the diocese together. I always felt if you have a good idea in Canton, the people in East Liverpool should know about it. If somebody in Ashtabula comes up with a new concept, the people in Youngstown should hear about it. And we always tried to do those kind of stories where there'd be more getting together in the diocese and less sectarian. What's the word I want? Less focusing on your local area.
Sure.
So,
well, it's interesting that partisanship, for lack of a better word, tends to be part, I think, of every diocese. And the larger the diocese, the more it is. And so I think you were very wise to try to bring that sense of unity among the 6 counties in our diocese. We only have a minute left of our middle segment, so we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I think that whole idea of what the Catholic exponent should do is certainly something that you brought forward. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. After the Catholics of Warren stopped meeting in their homes and organized a structured parish, they used a former Episcopalian church for their worship. St. Mary's Mission was established in 1837, yet the first resident pastor did not come to the parish until 1868. Other parishes quickly grew up in Trumbull County, including St. Stephen Niles in 1853, St. Patrick Hubbard in 1869, St. Vincent de Paul Vienna in 1871, now called St. Thomas the Apostle, and St. Rose Gerard in 1892. The other 15 parishes in the county were established after the turn of the 20th century. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. In 1850, a Catholic mission was established in Conneaut, making it the first organized Catholic presence in Ashtabula County. It wouldn't be until 1864 that an actual building was purchased to serve St. Mary Church. 8 years before the construction of St. Mary's Parish Church, St. Joseph Church in the city of Ashtabula was established. Parishes in Conneaut have aligned under the title of Corpus Christi Parish, and in the city of Ashtabula as Our Lady of Peace Parish. There are 11 other parishes in that county that serve over 20,000 Catholics. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Lou Jacquet, former editor of the Catholic Exponent. You know, Lou, you were talking about some of the people you had the opportunity and the privilege of interviewing, and what does that do for you personally, having those personalities that were part of your life, part of your career? And as we celebrate this significant anniversary in the life of the church, the local church, what does that tell you?
Well, I think the first thing I'd have to say is, for a small town kid from Bedford, Ohio, to end up working in places like Chicago and Youngstown and Delaware and so forth, and getting to interview people around the world. I used to also be talking to people at the Vatican quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And it really, the whole point of it is it reinforces your faith. I mean, you hear these amazing stories of people who live their faith day to day under sometimes incredibly difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. And you know, it just made me think, I have been so fortunate to cover this, and for 35 years to do it. Just astounding that, looking back, the people I ran into, the stories I got to cover, the events and everything, covering John Paul II in Chicago when he was first, in the papacy, and coming to Chicago, the Polish neighborhood and everything, just right. Those kind of memories are memories for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget. And I look back on that and just very, very fortunate. Everybody that came to town, I got to interview them here. Mm-hmm. So many different religious leaders that came to town. And you just get a sense of how the church is so universal. When one time a cardinal or a bishop from Australia came, and I was astounded. Why would he come to Youngstown? And he said, because everybody in Australia knows Bishop Malone. Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, you get the sense of how sometimes we're so focused on our own diocese, we don't realize we're part of this bigger, right, amazing church worldwide, you know. Yeah. It was fun to be part of that.
You know, I've often thought of, over the many years that you were with the Exponent, the innumerable editorials that you wrote. Was there any editorial that you wrote for you, that it was something that you felt in your heart and soul that this needed to be done? Was there anything that stands out in any of your writings that you wanted to share with people, that you felt that people really needed to know or to hear? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think, I wrote a lot of individual columns of my own, but that was a separate thing. The editorials were more of a stand for the paper. And I think I constantly tried to push getting people here to look at the broader church, to think of things like the situation in El Salvador, places like that, to look and realize that, we're here in Youngstown, we're here in Canton, we're here in these 6 counties of Northeast Ohio, but the church, the problems that we face, the problems that we have to solve, those are the kind of things that really need to be looked at from a broader perspective. I know when I think it was the Iraq War was going on, I tried to get people to think about how, that is such a tragedy on every level. It was a tragedy over there. It was a tragedy for the soldiers who had to go. It's just a tragedy that the church is still dealing with, you know? And those are things that people here need to think about and to kind of go out of their comfort zone. They didn't always, I got a lot of mail on that sort of thing. And I always said that, I told my wife about this, I used to get criticized from the far left and the far right, which always made me feel I was pretty fair to the 90% in the middle. Sure. You know, yeah. That was sort of the hallmark of trying to be a decent editor, because you're sort of like a moving target. You know, that was part of it. And I always tried to get people to look beyond their own parish. I really did.
You know, one of the words that comes to mind for me, but may not be necessarily for you, when you talk about the paper, the Catholic press, is that whole word of inspiration. You know, we believe that Catholic television is an inspiration for people. In the same way as the Catholic newspaper, can that be inspirational?
Oh, absolutely. We used to get mail that would astound me. Something that you would write in 20 minutes on deadline, and trying to get it done just in time to go to press, and someone would write a letter 6 weeks, 6 months later You know, you changed my son John's life. He turned to God in a way we never expected. Things like that, those stories just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I should mention, before we leave today, Ed Sullivan was a person I really wanted to mention today because he was a wonderful cartoonist. He was a wonderful reporter for us, former Pauline brother, brilliant man, had a wonderful career. And he inspired people every week with his cartoons. And people think, you know, cartoons are light and airy. Those cartoons touched many, many lives. They really did.
You know, as we continue that thought process about people who have inspired us, what would you hope to be inspired by as you are experiencing retirement, but also many years with the Catholic press? What gives you most inspiration, especially in light of celebrating anniversaries?
Well, I think you begin to realize how fast life passes by. You know, I'm closing in on 70 now, and that seemed impossible when I started in the Catholic press as a young kid. You just realize the swiftness and the fragility of life, and the experiences, the faith experiences of the people are just astounding to see. There's a richness in the Catholic faith day to day that just astounds me, and it's always astounded me. But to cover it and to be privileged to interview people about it and to try to bring that to the people in the pews, what a gift that was for all the years for me.
In our last minute together, what would you like to tell the folks that are with us in gratitude for those who are very faithful subscribers to the Catholic Exponent, and those who may not know much about it or don't read it as often? What would you like to tell them?
Well, I think they're missing out if they don't read it. I think you really need to have that week to week, in our case, it comes out every other week. You need that inspiration. You need that solid foundation in your diocese. You need to know what's going on in these counties. You really do. You need to know what the local church is doing. It's a perfect mouthpiece for the bishop to reach his people, and that's not going to change. You know, there are bishops who have said, well, I don't really think I need a paper anymore, and those dioceses are hurting. They really are. And I think, you know, the wisest ones are those that are always going to feel, I need a paper, I need a way to reach my people in the pews, and the Catholic press has been doing this for a long, long time, and hopefully it'll be doing it on whatever forms of communication are invented that we don't even know about in the time to come.
Well, Lou Jacquet, thank you so much for your presence on our show today, but also for your many years with the Catholic Exponent. They were fruitful years for us, and we are seeing the fruits of those blessings now. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Father.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.